In the latter half of the 19th century, it was said that the sun never set on the British Empire, which stretched across the globe, from Canada, the Caribbean, Africa, Afghanistan and India, Southeast Asia, Australia and New Zealand. Organising these colonies, outposts and protectorates was a challenge. One favoured British idea was the Canadian model, where 3 provinces were amalgamated into one self-governing federation under British control. In theory, at least, Britain then gets more of the economic benefit while having less of the administrative hassle. Since pushing the Dutch eastwards out of Cape Colony at the start of the 19th, Britain had sought to consolidate its control over South Africa. But it was a turbulent area, full of squabbling African tribes and independent-minded Boers. In 1878, a 9th tribal war was just concluding. The Canadian model, consolidating everyone under British control, was the goal, but the hurdles looked challenging. By far the biggest obstacle loomed to the Zulu nation, whose kingdoms encompassed a vast area in southern Africa. Covering much of the present-day KwaZulu-Natal province in South Africa, the kingdom's territories stretched from the Tugela River in the south to the Pongola River in the north, and from the Indian Ocean coastline in the east to the Drakensberg Mountains in the west. Commanded by King Cetshwayo, descending from the Nguni people of South Africa and nephew to the great Shaka Zulu. The Zulus were a highly militarized, warlike group. They were centrally governed, controlling trade routes and vast amounts of cattle in the region. Their favored weapon was the short assegai-type spear called the Iklwa, used in conjunction with a cowhide shield. A favored tactic was the bullhorns attack, whereby the main body of soldiers formed a solid block in the center, advancing to pin the enemy, while 2 strong and mobile flanks, or horns, moved quickly around the side to encircle the enemy. The Zulu had fought Europeans before, particularly the Boers. At the time, in the 1840s, the Boers had musket rifles, which were slow to reload. The Zulus had less experience of more modern European firepower. The British now had the powerful breech-loading Martini Henry rifle, which could leave horrendous wounds to flesh and bone. Sir Henry Bartle Frere arrives, the new High Commissioner for South Africa. A strong believer in Britain's imperial expansion. His resume boasts successes in the subjugation of India. But of this continent's makeup, he remains ignorant. He understands only one truth: that the mighty Zulu nation obstructs the path of colonial progress. When border disputes broke out between the Boers and British on one side and the Zulus on the other, Frere sensed an opportunity to reduce the Zulus' power, including by provoking a war if necessary. Though London explicitly instructs Frere against provoking the Zulu, the telegraph did not yet extend all the way to South Africa. Messages to and from London could take many days. By late 1878, London was starting to lose control of the situation. Pay 500 cattle in compensation, disband your army and age group system of military organization within 20 days. These are impossible demands. The Zulus are handed down a final decree that cannot be met without the disgrace of complete surrender to the crown. Both sides are thus bound for the brutality of war. The Zulu nation can muster around 30,000 hardened warriors to their cause. The British invasion force amounts to 18,000 professional soldiers, mounted cavalry regiments, field artillery pieces, and African auxiliary troops. They were divided into 3 main columns as they moved into Zululand on the 11th of January. Colonel Charles Pearson takes the coastal road. Colonel Evelyn Woods moved in from the north, the most powerful force. The central No. 3 column moved into Zulu territory at Rorke's Drift. In theory, the commander of this powerful force is Colonel Richard Glynn. But it's the overall leader of the British forces in South Africa, Lord Chelmsford himself, who accompanies and truly oversees the advance of the Central Column. Rorke's Drift is quickly transformed into a vital military supply depot and field hospital as Chelmsford's thousands push onward to the east. Some 4,700 soldiers under his direct command, their march is slow, constrained by the need for long baggage trains of ox-drawn supply wagons. Yet, the Zulus range across the harsh landscape with remarkable quickness, unburdened by heavy provisions as they live off the land. And they watch closely as the sluggish British columns grind ever farther into the heart of their kingdom. Lord Chelmsford was frustrated by the terrain. But a small but sharp skirmish with the Zulu group on the 12th of January went in favour of the British, increasing Chelmsford's confidence. Chelmsford and his officers scout ahead, assessing potential overnight campsites. Intelligence reaches them. Seshwayo's main Zulu force has departed its camp in Ulundi. But to where?
Guys, if you're enjoying this video, please give the video a like. Apparently, it really helps the channel grow. Thanks. Let's get back into the video.
Chelmsford chooses Isandlwana, a rocky hill, to be the next camp location. Expecting it would only be occupied for a day or two at the most before pushing further east. Only 10 miles were gained in a week's laborious march. The British Army had set rules about encampments in enemy territory. Ironically, some of those very orders were written by Chelmsford himself. They should be properly guarded, with entrenchments prepared and wagons formed into a defensive square. Yet Isandlwana sees few preparations, a mere perimeter screened by infantry. Many of the supply wagons have yet to even arrive by nightfall. In the afternoon of the 21st of January, Chelmsford received reports of Zulu forces to the southeast. He made a fateful decision. He took Colonel Glynn and half of the column forward to chase down the Zulus, leaving the other half back at Isandlwana under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Pauline. Pauline had no combat experience and had been left with 1,300 troops, one-third of which were African auxiliary troops and just 2 artillery pieces. On that fateful morning, the sun ascended into a cloudless sky. Chelmsford busied himself tracking small groups of Zulus. Zulu scouts shadowed the progress of Chelmsford's column from the tall grass. He was about 10 miles away from the camp at Isandlwana, just about within visual range, if aided by a hill and binoculars. Later in the morning, a group of 500 mounted troops under Colonel Durnford arrived at Isandlwana. A brief sigh of relief. Durnford was combat experienced. Not long after his arrival, the ridgelines to the north and east shimmered with numerous assegai blades catching the sun's glare. Durnford's scouts instinctively snatched up their rifles, turning to race back and alert their colonel. "Sir, they're coming from the northeast." Hoofbeats thunder across the grasslands as Durnford's cavalry troopers race to confront the enemy. His troopers almost immediately encountered a strong and mobile force of Zulus bearing down on the camp. The Martini Henrys spit defiance, each shot finding its mark. Yet the Zulus pushed forward, undeterred by mounting losses. Unprepared for a sustained action of this kind, ammunition pouches grew light. Some troops were sent to the main supply section of the camp, but were sent back empty-handed because they did not have the correct authorization. "Find Lord Chelmsford," a desperate soldier cried. It's very possible, even at this stage, Pauline did not fully understand the danger they were in. All the while unseen, the Zulus encircled northwest and south of the camp. They were rapidly approaching, not the impi Chelmsford chased, but the main Zulu army, 20,000 strong, mustered from all corners of the kingdom's reserves and commanded by the esteemed chief Enti Shingawayo Kamahole. Dispatches raced to Chelmsford, miles off on his wild goose chase, pleading for relief, for reinforcement. But the calls go unheeded, drowned out by distraction and disbelief. By the time word of the Zulu approach reached Pauline, it was too late. Pauline ordered his infantry to form a firing line. Hands moved feverishly, loading cartridges into hot rifle barrels. The sound of Zulu war cries reverberate. Warriors stretched from one end of the horizon to the other. Soldiers' eyes widened in fear. Commands bellow from their officers, with hopes to settle their men. The Zulus break into a charge as one unstoppable force. "Courage, men! The enemy is upon us!" For hours, the British firing line held firm, pouring volley after volley of rifle fire into the advancing Zulu ranks. Front rank, fire. Rear rank, fire. Front rank, reload. Hundreds fell, but the impi came on like a wave crashing against a crumbling embankment. Exhaustion and fatigue take their toll. Ammunition dwindles. Hold the line! The line begins to buckle, then breaks. The battle disintegrates into a savage melee. Redcoats fight with desperate fury. Their ammunition spent. Among burning tents, bayonets and rifle butts clash against the stabbing Ikloa blades. They form desperate squares and circles. At the bitter end, they fight back to back. Pauline and Durnford die with their men, as expected of British officers. Few run west towards Rorke's Drift and safety. Most are cut down in flight. Zulu warriors dart among the fallen, plunging spears into bellies to release the spirits of the dead. Others loot wagons, brandishing captured Martini Henrys and gorging on medicinal brandy. The Zulu had won an astonishing victory, but at a terrible price. More than 1,000 warriors lay dead on the field. Chelmsford's force reached the scene of devastation in the evening. "But I left over 1,000 men here," an ashen Chelmsford was heard to say. For long moments, the commanding officer stood mute with horror, surveying a scene of unimaginable carnage. The wagons were ashes, the horses slaughtered, and the grass slimy with blood. Under every thorn tree lay the mutilated remains of a redcoat soldier, his belly ripped open by blade. Fearing for the fate of Rorke's Drift, but not daring to move at night, the soldiers bedded down in the remains of the camp, alongside the corpses of fallen comrades. At the time, Chelmsford didn't realize that just 6 hours after the Battle of Isandlwana, Rorke's Drift was also under attack. Two battles, two sides of the same coin. We'll uncover what happened at Rorke's Drift in a following episode. The British had been overconfident and arrogant. They had catastrophically underestimated their enemy. A collapse in communication lines, Chelmsford dividing forces, or a lack of ammunition. The details were all a blur when news reached London on what exactly happened that fateful day. Months later, when it was finally judged safe for British burial parties to return to the battlefield, crows, hyenas and vultures had had their fill. All 3 British columns retreated. The campaign restarted later that year. This time, the British Army swore not to underestimate their foe.